On a warm afternoon in New Orleans, a group of firefighters stepped into an attic expecting smoke and flames. Instead, they found something much worse. What they discovered inside that mansion forced the entire city to face a truth it had ignored for far too long. This is not only the story of a woman who became a monster. It is the story of a society that helped create her. Part 1. The House That Held Its Breath. The afternoon of April 10, 1834, began like any other spring day in New Orleans. The air was humid and heavy with the scent of magnolias, drifting through the streets of the French Quarter. Carriages moved slowly along Royal Street, and neighbors greeted each other from iron balconies. Nothing seemed unusual until smoke began to curl out from the windows of the tall, elegant mansion at 1140 Royal Street. At first people gathered out of curiosity. Fires were common in the old city. But the crowd grew larger as thick smoke poured upward. When the fire brigade arrived and pushed open the heavy doors, they expected to find flames swallowing fine furniture and rich drapes. They expected to find the usual kind of disaster. Instead, they found horror waiting in the attic. When the firefighters broke down the attic door, every breath in the room froze. 7 enslaved people were chained to the walls. Their bodies showed signs of a cruelty that was beyond anything the men had ever imagined. Some hung by iron collars with sharp metal spikes pressing into their skin. Others had limbs pulled so far apart they looked torn. A few were so badly mutilated that even the firefighters did not know if they were still alive. Word spread through the neighborhood in minutes. The woman who lived here, the wealthy and respected Madame Delphine LaLaurie, was known for her beautiful gowns, her polite manners, and her glittering social events. She went to church every Sunday. She hosted the most admired parties among the city's elite. But behind those silk dresses and perfect smiles, she had been hiding a darkness so deep that no one wanted to believe it could exist. What happened inside her home did not come from nowhere. It grew from something larger. Something built into the society itself. Her cruelty was not simply the act of one evil person. It was the result of a system that gave complete power to slave owners, protected their violence, and encouraged their worst instincts. A system that turned human beings into property and treated torture as something that could be paid for like a business expense. To understand how Madame LaLaurie became a symbol of pure evil, we have to go back to the beginning of her life. She was not born a monster. She was shaped by the world around her. Her name was Marie Delphine McCarty. She was born on March 19, 1787, in a New Orleans caught between French, Spanish, and American control. Her father, Louis Barthélemy de McCarty, came from Irish ancestors who escaped English rule and settled in Louisiana. Her mother, Marie-Jeanne Lahorrible, was a wealthy widow from the powerful Creole elite. Together they belonged to the highest class in the city, a class built on the ownership of enslaved people. The McCarty family had money, land, and a long history of controlling plantations through violence. Her grandfather arrived in Louisiana in 1730 and helped build the family fortune on slave labor. When he died, he left his wealth to his 11 children, making sure every branch of the family stayed influential. Power was passed from one generation to the next like a legacy. Long before Delphine was born, her family experienced the fear that haunted every slave-owning household. In 1771 her uncle was killed by his own enslaved workers. That memory stayed alive in the McCarty family and shaped their behavior toward the people they owned. Then came the Haitian Revolution in 1791, when enslaved people in Saint-Domingue fought their way to freedom. Rumors and violent stories filled the newspapers in New Orleans. Slave owners lived in constant terror. They feared rebellion more than anything else. Delphine was only 4 years old when the revolution began, and she grew up hearing about it again and again. By the time she was 24, she witnessed the German Coast Revolt of 1811, the largest slave uprising in American history. Hundreds of enslaved people marched toward New Orleans, and the reaction from white militias was brutally violent. Nearly 100 enslaved people were killed, some tortured, others executed and displayed as warnings. For people like Delphine, these events created a world where cruelty was normal. Violence was accepted. Fear shaped daily life, and racism was the law. Louisiana operated under the Code Noir, a legal system that pretended to regulate the treatment of enslaved people but actually gave slave owners almost total freedom. A $10 fine for beating someone without reason. $2 a day if they became mutilated. A payment equal to the slave's value if they died. Anyone who could afford the penalty could commit almost any act they wanted. The law did not protect the enslaved. It protected the people who owned them. Families like the McCartys were so wealthy that these fines meant nothing. The system allowed cruelty to continue because cruelty could be paid for. Another element shaped Delphine's world. New Orleans had far more white men than white women. Relationships between white men and women of color were common, and they were often abusive or exploitative. Her father and uncles had relationships with black women, some enslaved, some free. In 1815 her father even had a daughter with a free quadroon woman named Sophie Sante. Sophie boldly gave the child Delphine's own name and listed the legitimate McCarty children as godparents. This kind of public challenge could have deepened Delphine's resentment and anger, especially in a culture obsessed with racial hierarchy. Even worse, multiple accounts written at the time describe Creole women as extremely cruel to their slaves. They punished, beat, mutilated, and even killed the people they owned. Some participated in slave trading. Many supervised punishments. These were the women Delphine grew up around. These were the behaviors she saw praised, ignored, or covered up. Her own cousin Celeste was known to have whipped an enslaved woman to death. She killed another with shocking cruelty, and the judge dismissed the case because her husband was the president of the Bank of Louisiana. There was no trial, no punishment. Power meant protection. Delphine grew up in a world that rewarded this behavior. She learned that money excused everything and that enslaved people had no rights. The seeds of her future cruelty were already there. When she turned 13, her family arranged her first marriage. On June 11, 1800, she married Don Ramón de López y Angulo, a Spanish officer almost 3 times her age. The marriage was meant to strengthen political ties. Ramón disobeyed royal orders by marrying without permission and was sent back to Spain as punishment. On the way home years later, he died in a shipwreck near Havana. Delphine was 19, alone, and pregnant. Her daughter Marie was born in Havana before she returned to New Orleans. On her 20th birthday she married again, this time to Jean Blanc, a well-connected banker, lawyer, merchant, and slave trader. He was a man who understood the power of corruption. He moved easily between the world of pirates and politicians, and he knew how to avoid consequences. When he married Delphine, he gained a huge dowry and access to a powerful family. Together they climbed even higher into New Orleans society. And with that rise in status came even more power over the lives of the enslaved people they owned. The darkness inside Delphine had been growing for years. Soon the city would see what that darkness could become. If you want part 2, just tell me, create part 2. Engaging hook. She was wealthy again. She was powerful again. And every time her power grew, someone in her house died. Neighbors whispered about the thin faces in the courtyard and the quiet cries drifting through her walls. But no one dared question Madame LaLaurie. Not yet, because the truth was more terrifying than any rumor. Behind her jeweled earrings and gentle smiles, she was slowly turning her mansion into a laboratory of suffering. Part 2. The House That Power Built. After the death of her second husband, Jean Blanc, Delphine found herself a widow once more. She was 28 years old, with 4 children and a mountain of debt worth what would now be more than $2 million. Her mother had died only weeks before Delphine's wedding to Blanc and left her daughter a large inheritance. This included an indigo plantation worked by 52 enslaved people. Her father later gave her another plantation with 26 enslaved laborers. Together these properties placed enormous wealth in her hands. But wealth in her world came with countless shadows. Governor William Claiborne once wrote to President Thomas Jefferson describing Blanc as a man of great intelligence and charm who was also deeply mistrusted. Blanc was popular in certain circles yet hated by many Americans. He was described as someone loyal to no country and no cause, a man who followed only his own gain. He moved easily through corruption. He broke rules without fear. He lived without consequences. Delphine saw all of this. She learned from it, and she never forgot it. When Blanc died in 1815 at age 50, his debts were overwhelming. She had to sell furniture, jewelry, and even the home where they lived. Once again she was left alone. Once again she stood at the edge of financial ruin. But something far more disturbing was happening inside her household during these years. Records from the period show that at least 20 enslaved people under her control died. 8 deaths occurred between 1815 and 1825. They came in pairs, 4 in the burning heat of summer and 4 in the cold months of winter. Most were women and children. Their names and ages were carefully recorded, but the official cause of death was always missing. Not even a false explanation was provided. Only their disappearance from the record remained. Throughout her life she owned at least 54 enslaved people, according to surviving documents. The real number was likely much higher. Enslaved people could be traded quietly, moved between properties, or hidden from census takers. Even with incomplete records, the mortality rate around her was extraordinary, even by the brutal standards of the time. Historians noticed a pattern. Every period of Delphine's life when her wealth or independence increased was also the period when cruelty and death among those she owned rose sharply. The more control she gained, the more suffering she inflicted. In 1824 her father died and left her another inheritance. It lifted her out of financial danger. It also gave her more freedom to act without restraint. Her transformation was nearly complete. Power was becoming her favorite language. The following year a young French doctor named Leonard Louis Nicolas LaLaurie arrived in New Orleans. He had studied medicine at the famous Sorbonne in Paris and completed his training at age 22. He came to Louisiana with instructions from his father. He was told to find a wealthy woman, marry into her world, and elevate the LaLaurie name. Their meeting was almost accidental. Delphine brought one of her children to him for treatment and the young doctor found himself mesmerized. She was 38 at the time yet still considered one of the great beauties of New Orleans. She had striking light eyes, delicate features, and an elegance that drew attention everywhere she went. Louis was only 22, but he saw the opportunity immediately. His brother Lawrence later wrote about his motives. Louis believed the medical profession could open the doors to a rich marriage. A wealthy woman could shelter him from financial uncertainty. Delphine seemed to be the perfect match for his ambitions. To the world she looked flawless. Her dark hair was always styled perfectly. Her skin was unblemished and pale. Her clothes were the finest in the city. It was impossible for anyone who stood at her table and accepted tea from her gentle hands to imagine that those same hands would later drill into skulls and tear at flesh. This contrast between her beauty and her cruelty is one of the reasons her story haunted New Orleans long after she fled. By the end of 1826 she became pregnant with Louis's child. On August 13, 1827 she gave birth to a son, John Louis Leonard LaLaurie. The child was born before the couple married and in that society, a baby born out of wedlock was scandalous. To hide this, the baby was baptized months before the marriage and the documents made the truth obvious to anyone reading them. The difference in their ages only deepened the gossip. She was almost 40. She had been widowed for 10 years. Louis was only 25. Her oldest daughter was already married with 2 children and was just 2 years younger than her new stepfather. Delphine herself became a grandmother around the same time she became a new mother. It was a strange and uncomfortable pairing in the eyes of the city. But Delphine held power in ways that mattered more than age. She was wealthy, connected, admired, and feared. Louis was described as shy, quiet, and obedient. In public he walked behind her rather than beside her. People whispered that he was not the head of the household. He was simply another possession she controlled. The marriage was troubled from the beginning. Neighbors heard fights through the walls. There were separations, reconciliations, more separations. By 1832 she had enough and filed a petition requesting legal separation. She claimed that her husband treated her with such cruelty that she could not bear to be near him. The petition described an incident on October 26 when Louis beat her violently in front of witnesses. 3 of her children confirmed the story. Louis was clearly abusive, but Delphine lived in a world where a woman had no protection against a husband. She could not charge him. She could not punish him. She had no legal power there. But she did have power somewhere else. Inside her home she controlled dozens of enslaved men, women, and children who had no rights whatsoever. It is common in violent hierarchies for victims in one space to become perpetrators in another. Delphine endured brutality at the hands of her husband. And she repeated brutality on those who had no way to defend themselves. Neighbors noticed changes. The enslaved people in her courtyard looked thinner. Some limped. Some had visible wounds. Their shoulders were tense and their expressions hollow. People whispered. But Delphine was so warm and charming in public that no one dared challenge her. Cruelty toward the enslaved was expected in that society. Violence was so normal that only extreme cases brought officials to investigate. But Delphine was not finished. She would soon exceed every limit that even New Orleans could ignore. In 1831 she purchased land at 1140 Royal Street. She designed a tall two-story mansion with an elegant facade, a spacious courtyard, and a separate wing for the kitchen and slave quarters. A third floor would be added decades later, long after she was gone. The original structure was large but deceptive. The beautiful rooms on the main floors hid something terrible. Within its walls she built spaces where no guest ever walked. The attic, the basement, narrow back rooms with locked doors. These were not storage spaces. They were chambers. She used them to carry out punishments that the city would one day try to forget. Survivors later said she created detailed rules for punishment. Nothing was random. She used tools that caused maximum agony while keeping her victims alive. She kept notes as if she were studying human pain. Some believed her husband's medical training influenced the horrifying experiments she created. Others said the darkness was entirely her own. What happened inside those hidden rooms would soon explode into the open. And when it did, New Orleans would finally see the monster it had allowed to grow in silence. If you want part 3, just tell me, create part 3. Part 3, the house that screamed every night. Engaging hook. Some houses hold secrets behind walls. Others bury them. But the LaLaurie mansion on Royal Street did neither. It let its secrets scream. Every night. And somehow, the entire city of New Orleans learned to sleep through the sound of human agony. But on one burning morning in 1834, the house finally screamed loud enough that no one could pretend anymore. Part 3. Long before the fire, long before crowds filled the street, the attic of the LaLaurie mansion had already become a place of death. It was a sealed room with no windows and no air. During summer, temperatures climbed past 120 degrees. Inside that unbearable heat, chained men and women lay on the floor gasping for breath in pools of sweat and blood. The heat was so intense that their skin blistered just from being alive. Some fainted from dehydration, others vomited from the smell that never went away. Even the strongest eventually collapsed. The room was so hot and rotten that human bodies began to decompose while still alive. Every neighbor smelled it. It drifted across Royal Street for years, that sharp mix of blood, sweat, rot, and burned flesh. People wrinkled their noses, whispered to each other, and quickly shut their windows. It was easier to pretend it came from the butcher shop down the road than from the house of one of the most respected women in town. At night, the sounds were even worse. People heard chains scraping across the floor. They heard gagged voices trying to scream. They heard the muffled thuds of bodies collapsing. The same noises repeated every night, like a sick rhythm. But New Orleans society preferred silence. The mansion hosted glittering parties filled with music, wine, and the finest clothes. And while guests laughed, a person in the kitchen served food with an iron collar digging into her bleeding neck. Some guests noticed these collars and the spiked masks. They noticed blood drops on a slave's white apron. They saw trembling hands pouring their champagne. They simply kept drinking. They complimented her on her taste in decor. They pretended they had seen nothing. Delphine collected torture tools as if they were art. She kept iron collars of different sizes, all lined with sharp spikes. She had masks that covered the entire face so victims could not eat. She had metal whips, chains, hooks, and cages. Her favorite device was the cat o' nine tails, a whip with metal pieces at the end that tore skin every time it struck. Some punishments were for the smallest things. A dropped plate, a slow answer, a tear that fell without permission. After beatings, victims rarely stood up again. Some never stood again at all. Her cruelty did not stop at violence. She forced enslaved people to work in the city to earn money but demanded every single coin when they returned. If someone came back a few minutes late or brought less money than she expected, they were chained in the basement without food. Some fainted on the street and were found by police, who returned them straight to the mansion with bruised backs and starving faces. The system delivered victims right back to their torturer. Nobody cared enough to stop it. Dr. Louis LaLaurie made everything worse. He had a respected medical office in the city. People praised him for his skill. They had no idea that the same steady hands that treated broken bones during the day were breaking bones in the attic at night. He experimented on the enslaved. He studied how bones healed after being shattered. He broke arms and legs, waited for them to mend in twisted shapes, then broke them again at new angles. He turned bodies into grotesque sculptures. Sometimes Delphine worked alone, other times Louis helped her. Some slaves were forced to assist under threats of death. The victims hung in chains with open wounds, broken limbs, and shattered spirits. Some were found with eyes missing, tongues cut, or nails torn out. One man was still alive with a wooden spoon shoved into a hole drilled into his skull. His eyes moved, but he could not scream. Delphine returned often to twist the spoon, mixing his brain slowly, keeping him alive for as long as she wished. She also tortured men in a way meant to break them completely. She cut their most private parts and left them to bleed. She mutilated them for hours, sometimes laughing softly as they begged. When they died, she left them hanging. Their bodies rotted in the attic, adding to the smell that floated across Royal Street. Women suffered in ways too brutal to understand. One woman had her arms and legs broken over and over until her limbs bent outward like a crab. Another had her skin peeled in spirals from head to toe while still alive. She looked like a human creature without skin, covered only in red muscle and strips of torn flesh. Others had their intestines pulled out and wrapped around their bodies like ropes. Her cruelty did not end with those she considered disposable. Her elderly cook, a 70-year-old woman, was chained to the kitchen stove by her ankle. She cooked every meal while starving. When her own daughters tried to feed the cook or help anyone else, Delphine whipped them. She punished her own children for showing kindness. Some enslaved people were kept completely off the records. These secret victims were believed to be used by Dr. LaLaurie for medical experiments. Some people believed he was trying to create more obedient slaves. Others believed he simply enjoyed the freedom to do whatever he wanted. One man who saw too much threw himself from a second-floor window and died. Delphine ordered the window sealed with cement. The block of cement is still there today, a silent witness to a desperate escape. Authorities did come, but nothing changed. In 1828, they found slaves in terrible condition, covered in blood. She charmed the court and lied elegantly, and they believed her. She was a wealthy woman, after all. A woman of society. A woman whose word carried more weight than the lives of the enslaved. She was charged again in 1832 and again in 1833. Each time she paid a fine or was ordered to sell slaves. But friends and family bought them and returned them to her house. The law pretended to punish her. Society pretended to care. But everyone knew the truth. Nothing would ever stop her. Until a 70-year-old woman decided that death by fire was better than another day in that house. On the morning of April 10, 1834, flames began rising from the kitchen. The cook who had been chained to the stove lit the fire herself. She wanted to die before they dragged her to the attic. Smoke curled into the air as neighbors gathered outside. Some tried to save furniture. Others whispered about the people trapped upstairs. When Judge Jacques-François Canonge asked Louis for the attic keys, the doctor told him to mind his own business. But the judge had heard years of screams from across the street. He knew exactly what was behind that locked door. The moment he ordered the firefighters to break it down, the mansion's evil finally stepped into the sunlight. And the world would never forget what they found. If you'd like, I can now write part 4 or refine part 3 further. Part 4. The day the city finally saw the truth. Engaging hook. People had whispered about screams coming from the LaLaurie mansion for years. But on April 10, 1834, When the attic door was finally smashed open, the truth burst into the daylight like a monster unchained. New Orleans thought it already knew horror. It was wrong. What they saw in that attic changed the city forever. Part 4. The fire raged through the service building while chaos exploded in the street. Smoke poured from the windows, and people rushed to save furniture, paintings, jewelry, and expensive clothes from the mansion. The elegant home of Madame LaLaurie looked like a burning stage, and all of New Orleans seemed to be watching. Firefighters struggled against the flames, but the heat was rising too fast. The fire had started near the kitchen, exactly where the 70-year-old cook had been chained. Neighbors shouted that there were slaves trapped upstairs, but the LaLauries refused to hand over the keys. People stared at them in disbelief. A house was burning. People might die. Yet the wealthy couple acted as if they were being inconvenienced. Judge Canninge, who lived across the street, stepped forward. He had heard the rumors for years, had smelled the strange odors from the mansion, had seen the thin and trembling slaves. This time he had authority on his side. He asked again for the attic keys so the firefighters could rescue whoever was trapped. Louis LaLaurie told him sharply to leave them alone. His reaction was not just cold. It was hostile. The judge realized something terrible was being hidden behind those locked doors. He raised his voice and told the fire brigade to break them open. The LaLauries protested loudly, but this time no one cared. The crowd wanted answers. The firefighters took axes and crowbars and ran toward the back building. The wood around the door was thick and reinforced, as if someone had wanted to keep people in. The first axe hit the door. Smoke burst through the cracks. The second strike made the hinges shake. A few more hits and the door gave way. The men stepped inside and froze. The air inside the attic was suffocating. It felt like opening the door to an oven. The heat was so intense that sweat poured down their faces instantly. The dark room was filled with smoke, but as it cleared just enough, the shapes in the room became visible. People, chained, twisted, barely alive. Some of the firefighters hesitated, gripping their tools tightly, unsure if what they were seeing was real. Others stepped forward with their hands covering their mouths. The smell hit them like a wall. Not the smell of burned wood. Not the smell of smoke. The smell of rot. Bodies that had been hanging for weeks were decomposing. Skin had peeled away. Bones were exposed. The heat of the attic had cooked them alive slowly, then kept their bodies decaying in the worst possible conditions. One firefighter whispered a prayer under his breath. Another backed away, sick to his stomach. The first victim they approached was chained to the wall, barely conscious. Her skin was blistered, cracked, and covered in scars from beatings. Her lips were sewn shut with thick thread. She tried to speak through her nose, making faint choking sounds. Another victim lay on the floor, unable to move, both legs twisted at impossible angles. Those legs had been broken on purpose, healed incorrectly, then broken again. Each bone bulged under the skin. She looked more like a creature than a human, but her eyes were alive and begging for help. A man hung from the ceiling, arms stretched upward and shackled so tightly his shoulders had dislocated months earlier. A wooden spoon stuck out of his skull. The firefighters stared in frozen horror. They had never seen anything like it. The man was alive. His eyes moved slowly toward them. He tried to breathe, but only a rattling sound escaped. Another woman sat chained upright, her body wrapped with her own intestines like ropes. Her breath was shallow. Her head fell forward and then lifted again with the little strength she had left. Her eyes were empty, but she was still alive. One of the firemen shouted outside for medical help. People gathered at the entrance in shock, covering their mouths. The scene was far worse than any rumor anyone had ever whispered. It was torture on a scale no one had imagined could exist inside a wealthy New Orleans mansion. Word spread quickly through the crowd. The shock turned into outrage. Some gasped. Some cried. Others stared silently in disbelief. The horrifying truth was finally visible to everyone. The reputation of Madame LaLaurie, the elegant and respected socialite, crumbled instantly. When the firefighters brought the first victims outside, people recoiled. They did not know if they should approach or step back. Some women screamed. Men cursed out loud. Children hid behind their parents. A group of neighbors began yelling that the LaLauries needed to be arrested immediately. But the couple had quietly slipped away. Amid the confusion, while everyone ran toward the fire, Madame LaLaurie had stepped into her carriage, calm and composed. She told her coachman to leave quickly. Witnesses remembered seeing her sitting in her seat, completely emotionless, her face untouched by smoke or worry. She left the burning house without looking back once. Inside the house, the remaining victims were carried out one by one. The firefighters worked fast, trying to rescue anyone who was still alive. Every survivor was placed on the ground outside, where doctors and neighbors tried to give them water and wrap their wounds. Some victims were so dehydrated they could barely swallow. Others drifted in and out of consciousness. Crowds kept growing. Word traveled through New Orleans like lightning. People abandoned shops, rushed from their homes, and filled the street to see the horror for themselves. The elegant white mansion, once a symbol of wealth and beauty, now looked like a gateway to hell. Inside the attic, the men found wooden tables stained with old and fresh blood. They found chains bolted into the walls and floors. They found boxes filled with torture devices. One man found a journal filled with notes. Some entries looked like records of injuries, experiments, or punishments. No one knew whether the handwriting belonged to Madame LaLaurie or her husband. Both seemed capable of these horrors. The fire was finally put out, but the emotional fire spreading through the city was only beginning. In New Orleans, where slave cruelty was common and often ignored, the scale of what was discovered inside the LaLaurie mansion was something different. Something past cruelty. Something monstrous. For the first time, people realized someone in their community had crossed a line that even that brutal society could not accept. By the end of the afternoon, the entire city was demanding justice. But justice would not come as easily as the crowd hoped. Because Madame LaLaurie was already far away, leaving behind a house of nightmares and a city shocked to its core. If you'd like, I can create part 5 next. Part 5. The night New Orleans lost its patience. Engaging hook. The attic had been opened. The truth was out. But horror is not silent. It spreads. And on the night after the fire, something awakened inside the people of New Orleans. Fear mixed with rage. Shock mixed with guilt. The city that once whispered about the mansion now marched toward it. And this time they did not come to watch. They came to destroy. Part 5. The discoveries of the attic spread through New Orleans so fast it felt like the entire city was whispering the same terrible story. People could not believe what they had heard. Others wished they had not believed it. But no one could deny what the firefighters saw inside the LaLaurie mansion. By nightfall, the news reached every corner of the French Quarter. Crowds gathered outside homes and shops, discussing the details with trembling voices. The people were not just angry. They were ashamed that such horrors had happened in their city, inside a house they had admired for years. The survivors rescued from the attic lay in makeshift beds in different homes because there was no hospital prepared for so many tortured and dying people. Doctors worked desperately to save them, but many had injuries too deep and too old. Their bodies had been pushed far beyond what human beings can endure. Some whispered for water. Some cried softly. Some could not speak at all. Their pain filled the rooms like an invisible smoke. In every neighborhood people were talking about the same thing. They wondered how many years the torture had gone on. They argued about how the LaLauries had escaped so quickly. Some claimed they saw Delphine leave in her carriage, sitting straight and calm, as if nothing had happened. Others swore she had a small smile on her face, as if pleased with the chaos she left behind. As the sun set and the sky turned a deep orange, people began walking toward the mansion. It started with just a few neighbors. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Soon the entire street was filled with angry voices. New Orleans had seen cruelty before, but never like this. Never in such detail. Never with such proof. And the fire had burned away the last layer of silence the city had used to hide from the truth. By the time the moon rose, a mob had formed outside the mansion. People carried lanterns. Some held sticks. Others carried stones. The elegant white walls of the LaLaurie mansion glowed faintly in the moonlight, but tonight the house did not look beautiful. It looked like a monster. A giant silent monster waiting for its judgment. People began shouting for justice. Others yelled for the LaLauries to be dragged back to the city. Some cursed. Some prayed. Everyone was ready to act. They pushed against the gate and forced it open. The front doors were still unlocked from the chaos earlier that day. The crowd rushed inside like a wave. The first room they entered was the grand parlor where Delphine had hosted her finest parties. It was filled with elegant chairs, polished tables, and tall mirrors. The people stared at the furniture with disgust. They imagined her laughing here while people cried in the attic above. They imagined guests sipping wine while screams echoed through the walls. The anger inside the crowd tightened like a fist. The destruction began slowly. Someone threw a chair across the room. A woman screamed and shattered a mirror with a heavy candlestick. A man smashed a painting of Delphine into pieces. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the mansion. Once the first blow was struck, the crowd did not stop. People climbed the stairs, kicking down doors and tearing apart anything that belonged to the LaLauries. They grabbed the fine curtains and ripped them down. They smashed plates. They tore apart mattresses. They threw furniture out of windows. The noise was loud and wild, like a storm happening inside the house. For years people had watched the mansion from the outside and wondered about the secrets hidden inside. Now they saw the truth, not just in the attic but in every room. Behind the luxury there was something rotten. Something cold. Something cruel. The destruction was not just anger. It was a release of years of guilt and silence. People felt responsible for ignoring the screams, for pretending the smells meant nothing, for turning away from the truth. Now they were taking back control, breaking apart the symbol of their own failure. Outside, more people arrived. The noise was so loud that the entire French Quarter could hear the destruction. Some people joined the mob. Others stood in the street watching, stunned by the sight of respectable citizens tearing apart a mansion stone by stone. Inside, the crowd moved from room to room until they reached the staircase leading to the attic. A sudden silence fell over them. They knew what waited above. They knew that the attic held more horror than the rest of the house combined. Slowly they climbed the stairs. When they reached the top, the stench still lingered. The room still looked like a nightmare frozen in place. Chains hung from the walls. Torture devices lay on the tables. Blood stained the wood. The crowd stared at the scene, unable to believe that human beings had been treated like this. Many turned away. Some cried. Others whispered prayers. One man fell to his knees, overcome with grief and rage. The mob did not destroy the attic the way they destroyed the rest of the house. They could not. The room felt sacred in a terrible way. It felt like a grave. They left it untouched so the world could see exactly what had happened here. Below the attic, however, they kept going. They smashed the marble floors. They tore doors from their hinges. They broke windows. They pulled apart cabinets. They destroyed the elegant chandeliers. They ripped paintings from the walls. They did not stop until the mansion was nearly unrecognizable. By the time the mob was finished, only the structure of the house remained. Everything else was ruined. The LaLauries did not return that night. They did not return the next day. They never returned again. New Orleans woke the next morning to the sight of the destroyed mansion. People stood in the street in silence, staring at what was left. The house looked broken. It looked wounded. And yet it still stood, tall and heavy, like an empty shell holding secrets. The survivors rescued from the attic were moved to another location where people donated food, clothes, and blankets. The city suddenly cared about them, but it was too late for many. Their injuries were beyond repair. The question on everyone's mind was simple. Where had Delphine gone? Rumors began to spread. Some said she fled to the countryside. Others said she boarded a ship to France. Some claimed she disguised herself and was hiding somewhere in the city. But the truth was this. Delphine LaLaurie had vanished, leaving a trail of horror behind her that New Orleans would never forget. If you want, I can create part 6 next. Engaging hook. Sometimes the truth hides in places where no sunlight reaches. And when you finally shine a light there, you discover that what lives in the darkness has been waiting for you all along. Part 6. The night at the old settlement felt colder than any night before. Catherine sat close to the small fire, rubbing her hands together as her breath came out in pale clouds. The strange map Sister Agnes had drawn still lay open beside her. It showed paths that were not on any normal map and symbols she could not understand. Yet something in her heart whispered that she was meant to follow it. The forest around her was quiet. Too quiet. Even the owls had stopped calling. Catherine looked up at the trees. Their tall shapes stood like silent guards, watching, listening, waiting for something to happen. Father Merrill stepped out from behind one of the trees, his face partly hidden by the shadows. When he moved closer, the firelight showed worry in his eyes. "You should not travel alone, Catherine," he said softly. "The place you are going is not safe." Catherine kept her voice steady. "I do not have another choice. Sister Agnes trusted me with this map. She wanted me to go where she could not." Father Merrill turned his gaze toward the forest path. His hands tightened around his rosary. "I fear that whatever happened at the convent is not finished. Evil does not stay in one place. It follows those who understand its secrets." Catherine folded the map and stood up. "Then I must understand it faster." Before they could speak again, a strange sound rose in the distance. It was not human. It was not animal. It was a low moaning hum that seemed to move through the trees like wind made of voices. Catherine felt a shiver climb up her spine. Father Merrill whispered a prayer under his breath. "It has found us." Branches cracked. The humming grew louder. Catherine grabbed her small lantern and stepped back from the fire. The dark shapes between the trees began to shift. Something was coming toward them. A figure appeared first. A tall woman with a white veil and long thin hands. But her feet did not touch the ground. Her face was hidden, yet Catherine felt its gaze pressing on her like weight on her chest. Behind the floating woman, more shapes moved. All of them wearing veils. All of them drifting silently. Catherine whispered, "They are the sisters." But they were not sisters anymore. Their veils were torn and stained. Their arms hung stiff like broken branches. Their movements were slow and heavy, almost as if they were puppets pulled by invisible strings. The humming came from them. A single sound made from many trapped voices. Father Merrill lifted his rosary. "Leave us in peace," he shouted. The tall woman tilted her head. Slowly. Too slowly, as if her bones resisted the movement. When she spoke, her voice was not one voice but many layered together. "You left us behind." Catherine felt her stomach twist. She knew that voice. It was the voice of the convent choir. A sound that once filled the chapel with beauty now cracked through the forest like a curse. The spirits moved closer. The fire dimmed under their presence. Cold wrapped around Catherine like a wet cloth. She felt her heartbeat echo in her ears. Catherine opened her lantern and let the flame grow brighter. She stepped in front of Father Merrill. "You trusted me once," she said. "And I will not run from you. But I need to know what happened. Why did the rituals begin? Why were you chosen? Why did no one leave?" The tall spirit reached out a thin hand. The fingertips stopped inches away from Catherine's throat. The humming grew louder until it felt like it was coming from inside her own skull. Catherine clenched her teeth and fought to stay conscious. The spirit whispered, "We were promised salvation. Instead, we were given to the darkness below." Catherine felt her blood freeze. Below, the spirit pointed toward the direction shown on Sister Agnes' map. Deep in the woods, beyond the old river, a place Catherine had never heard of. The tall ghost's voice trembled. "We were taken there, one by one, and we became what you see now." Another spirit drifted forward. Her veil slipped off enough for Catherine to see a hollow face with empty eye sockets that still somehow stared at her. The ghost's mouth moved as if struggling to speak. "Stop," it whispered. "Do not follow the path. Do not seek what Agnes found. If you go there you will never return." The fire flickered wildly. The wind roared through the trees. Catherine felt fear trying to swallow her. But something stronger pushed up from inside her. A determination she did not know she had. "If I do not go," she said quietly, "who will end this?" The tall spirit lowered her hand. For a moment Catherine thought it might approve of her courage. But then its voice changed. It no longer sounded like layered voices. It sounded like one clear voice. A gentle one. A familiar one. "Agnes." Catherine's eyes widened. Sister Agnes' voice came from the tall spirit. "Catherine," she said, "do not fear them. They cannot harm you while the lantern burns. But do not trust everything they tell you. They remember only their suffering. They do not remember the truth. Catherine stepped closer. Agnes, is it really you? The tall spirit flickered like a candle in wind. I am not whole, she said. But I hold one last memory. One that will guide you. Go to the old root cellar. The one under the first chapel. The truth is buried there. Before Catherine could ask anything more, the spirits began to pull away. Their bodies stretched unnaturally as if the darkness itself was pulling them backward. Their humming became a desperate cry. Father Merrill grabbed Catherine's hand. The lantern, Catherine, hold it high. She lifted it just as the spirits let out a final wailing sound. The flame burst into a bright glow. A wind pushed the spirits back. Their shapes dissolved into the trees until nothing was left. Silence fell. Catherine stood trembling. Father Merrill steadied her. The old root cellar, he said. That place has been locked for years. No one goes there. Catherine folded Sister Agnes' map again. We are going there now. And for the first time she noticed something new on the map. A small symbol in the corner. Not drawn in ink. Drawn in dried blood. It matched the mark she had seen on the walls of the convent basement. Catherine took a slow breath. She knew part 7 of her journey would be darker than anything she had faced so far. She tightened her grip on the lantern and stepped into the trees. The path to the truth had begun. If you want part 7, just say, create part 7. Engaging hook. When the truth hides underground, it does not sleep. It waits. And those who dare to uncover it soon learn that some doors were never meant to be opened. Part 7. Catherine walked through the forest with the lantern held high. The cold morning light tried to push through the trees, but the woods still felt heavy and dim. Father Merrill followed close behind her, his steps slow and tense. Neither of them had slept. Neither of them spoke. They both knew the path had changed the moment the spirits appeared. The air smelled of wet earth. Birds did not sing. Even the wind seemed frightened to move. Catherine looked down at Sister Agnes' map again. The small blood symbol in the corner pulled at her thoughts. She kept thinking about Agnes' voice coming from the tall spirit. Agnes had warned her not to trust the spirits fully. Agnes had told her the truth was buried in the old root cellar under the first chapel. Catherine could not shake the feeling that someone was watching them. After a long walk they reached a clearing. At the center stood the ruins of the first chapel. Only the stone foundation remained. The wooden walls had collapsed long ago. Moss grew over most of the stones. Tall weeds covered the floor where the pews once stood. But Catherine recognized the place from old drawings she saw in the convent library. Father Merrill crossed himself. I never thought I would see this again. They stopped using this place before I was born. They said it was unstable. Dangerous. Catherine felt a chill. Maybe it was not the structure that was dangerous. Maybe it was something inside. She moved slowly through the ruins. Her footsteps echoed over the stone floor. The lantern light played over the broken stones and shadows. Behind the altar platform she saw a wooden door half buried in dirt and roots. The root cellar. She knelt and brushed the wet soil away from the edge of the door. Her fingers trembled. The wood felt soft and cold, like something that had been touched too many times by damp hands. Father Merrill stood behind her. His voice was barely above a whisper. Catherine, there are reasons this place was sealed. Some secrets destroy the ones who search for them. Catherine touched the lantern. Its flame stayed steady and warm. Agnes trusted me, and I trust her. Father Merrill said nothing. He only bowed his head. Catherine pulled at the door. It did not move. She pulled again with both hands until the wooden frame cracked. With a final hard pull, the door opened. A foul smell rose up from the darkness below. A mix of wet soil, cold stone, and something older. Something rotten. She lifted the lantern and began to descend the narrow steps. The cellar was small but deep. The walls were made of stone, covered in marks. Some looked like scratches. Others looked like strange symbols. Catherine moved the lantern closer. The symbols matched the ones on the map. Her heart thudded hard. Someone had carved these into the wall long ago. But why were they all the same symbol repeated again and again? Father Merrill stepped down behind her. He coughed as the smell filled the air. His voice came shakily. These walls were carved by the sisters. I can tell. Look at the lines. They were done with prayer knives. But this symbol is not from any prayer I know. Catherine touched one of the carvings. The stone felt faintly warm. That frightened her more than anything. Stone should never feel warm this deep underground. She took a slow breath and walked farther inside. At the far end of the cellar she found something strange. A wooden chair. A chair placed right in the center of the room. The ropes tied to it were old, stiff, and dark with stains. The sight turned her stomach. Father Merrill stepped back. Dear God, they used this place for rituals. They tied someone here. Catherine stared at the chair. She imagined a woman sitting there, unable to move while strange voices filled the room. She imagined the sisters chanting around her. She imagined the darkness Agnes warned her about rising from below. A sudden sound broke her thoughts. A soft whisper. Catherine turned quickly. The whisper came from the walls. Then it came from the ground. Then it came from the air itself. Catherine, her name, spoken so gently that it felt like a hand brushing her cheek. Father Merrill stepped closer to her. Catherine, stay near the lantern. Do not let it dim. The whisper came again. Catherine, come closer. It came from the wall behind the chair. She swallowed. I know that voice. To her shock, the stone wall began to shift. The carvings glowed faintly. Light leaked through the cracks as if something was burning on the other side. Catherine held the lantern up. The flame flickered wildly. The wall slowly pushed outward. Dirt crumbled, and from behind the stone a thin wooden door appeared. A hidden door. The boards looked newer than the rest of the cellar. Someone had sealed this place not long ago. Father Merrill shook his head. No, Catherine, do not open that. Whatever is behind that door is not meant to be found. But the voice came again. Catherine, it is me, Agnes. It sounded exactly like Sister Agnes. Kind, soft, familiar. Catherine felt tears rise in her eyes. She reached for the door. Father Merrill grabbed her arm. Catherine, listen to me. Spirits lie. Evil copies the voices we love. It tricks us with the sounds of safety. Catherine pulled her arm free. Agnes warned me about the spirits. But she trusted me. I know her voice. I know her. She pushed on the door. It opened with a long, hollow sound. Behind the door lay a narrow tunnel lined with stone. The air was colder. The lantern light barely reached the end. Catherine stepped inside. Father Merrill followed but hesitated at the doorway. The tunnel sloped downward. The deeper they went the colder it became. The whispering returned. It swirled around her like thin fingers touching her hair and shoulders. Then Catherine saw something at the bottom of the tunnel. A small wooden box. The whispering stopped. Catherine approached the box slowly. Father Merrill stood at her back, shaking. She knelt and opened it. Inside the box lay a small book wrapped in cloth. The cloth was red, not dyed red, stained red. Catherine touched it and felt a sudden warmth run through her hand. When she unwrapped the cloth, the book inside glowed faintly. Its cover was made of leather too old and too soft. Its pages were filled with symbols she had seen on the cellar walls. On the first page a name was written. Agnes. Catherine felt her heart crack open. Agnes wrote this. This is her book. This is her truth. Suddenly the tunnel shook. The lantern flame jumped. A deep rumble came from the ground below. Father Merrill shouted, Catherine, get back. Something is waking. Catherine held the book tightly against her chest. She looked down the tunnel. In the far darkness two pale shapes began to form. They grew larger and larger. Then the whispering returned, louder, angrier. The spirits had followed them. Catherine grabbed Merrill's arm. Run. They raced up the tunnel as the spirits chased them. The walls shook. Dust fell. The lantern flickered but Catherine held it high. When they reached the root cellar, Catherine slammed the hidden door shut. The spirits screamed behind it. Their voices rose like a storm trapped underground. Father Merrill pulled Catherine toward the stairs. Go. Get out. The cellar shook harder. Stones cracked. Catherine stumbled up the stairs and out into the cold air. Father Merrill followed and pushed the old door shut. The ground beneath the ruins trembled one last time, then went still. Catherine held the red-stained book in her hands. Agnes had left the truth behind. Part 8 would bring Catherine closer to the darkness than ever before. If you want Part 8, just say, create Part 8. Engaging hook. Sometimes the truth does not set you free. Sometimes it drags you deeper into the dark, and once you see it, you can never return to the world you knew before. Part 8. The wind over the ruins felt sharp and cold as Catherine held the stained book close to her chest. The earth had settled again, but the memory of the shaking tunnel refused to leave her thoughts. Father Merrill stood beside her with sweat on his face even though the air was cold. He kept staring at the door to the cellar as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Catherine looked at the book. Agnes had touched it. Agnes had written in it. This was the only thing Agnes left behind. Catherine felt her heart tighten as she slowly opened the cover. The pages gave a soft crack like old leaves underfoot. Strange symbols filled each page. Some were familiar from the cellar walls. Others were far more complex. Many pages were covered in what looked like hurried notes written in a shaky hand. Catherine touched the ink. It was faded but still clear enough to read. She read the first words out loud. The sisters were wrong. The rituals did not heal. They summoned something. Something that does not belong here. Father Merrill stepped closer. Summoned? What does she mean? Catherine continued reading. Agnes wrote about the early sisters who had lived at the convent long before Catherine was born. They believed they could speak with spirits to heal the sick and guide the lost. At first the spirits seemed gentle. The sisters performed ceremonies under the chapel. They used chants and symbols to open the door between worlds. But they did not understand what they invited. Catherine turned the page. The ink was darker here. Agnes had pressed the quill hard into the paper. The spirits are not what they seem. They wear the voices of those we love. They pretend to be peaceful. But they grow stronger with every ceremony. They feed on fear. They feed on pain. They wait for someone who will open the door fully. Catherine felt her breath catch. Agnes believed the sisters had created a passage for something far more dangerous than they ever understood. Merrill rubbed his forehead. They were reaching out for comfort, but they opened something ancient. Something that should have stayed silent. Catherine nodded slowly. Her hands trembled as she turned another page. Agnes had written about one sister who had tried to stop the rituals. A sister named Mary Elise. She wanted to burn the book and seal the tunnels forever. But the others did not listen. They thought she was frightened without reason. They continued the ceremonies until Mary Elise vanished. Catherine whispered, Mary Elise. That name was never in the convent records. Father Merrill spoke softly. They must have erased her. They erased whoever went against them. Catherine looked up from the book. Her imagination filled with the pale shapes that chased her in the tunnel. She wondered if Mary Elise had become one of them. The wind blew again through the ruins. It seemed to carry a faint whisper. Catherine froze. The whisper grew stronger. She turned toward the trees. The sound came from the forest. Father Merrill stepped behind her. Catherine, stay close. The whisper drifted through the branches like a voice calling from far away. Catherine, come back. Catherine felt the hair rise on her neck. Agnes' voice. The same gentle sound she knew since childhood. But something was wrong in the way it stretched and drifted through the air. Father Merrill grabbed her shoulder. Remember what Agnes wrote. They can take voices. They can shape them. Catherine swallowed hard. She looked back at the ruins. They still needed answers. Agnes' book held them, but it was not enough. She closed the book and held it tightly. We need to return to the convent. There are more records. There might be letters from Mary Elise. And the Mother Superior might know the truth. Father Merrill nodded reluctantly. Then we must hurry. The spirits grow stronger when they sense fear. They began the long walk back through the forest. Each step felt heavier. Catherine kept her eyes on the book. She wanted to understand every symbol inside. She needed to know why these spirits were after her. And why Agnes had chosen her to uncover the truth. When they reached the convent gates, the sun had begun to set. The long shadows across the courtyard looked like dark hands stretching across the ground. The convent building stood quietly as if holding secrets inside its walls. Inside the main hall, several sisters gathered around the tall candles. Their faces looked pale. Their eyes shifted with nervous worry. Something had frightened them. Mother Superior Therese approached Catherine. Her expression was tight and unreadable. You did not return after morning prayers. Where have you been? Catherine held the book behind her. In the ruins of the first chapel. I found something. At once the sisters around them gasped. Mother Superior eyes widened with anger. You were told never to go there. Catherine felt her courage rise. And I saw why. You kept secrets. Your records hide the truth. You erased names. You erased sins. And now the spirits you invited are walking through the forest. The Mother Superior grabbed Catherine's arm. You do not understand what you are saying. Those ruins are cursed. The cellar is cursed. It must stay buried. Catherine pulled her arm away. It is already awake. Agnes tried to warn you. She tried to stop you. She left a book with everything you hid. The room went silent. Mother Superior's face drained of color. Slowly she stepped back. Her voice trembled. You found the book. Catherine lifted it. Yes. Mother Superior closed her eyes as if a heavy truth pressed on her chest. Then she whispered something Catherine did not expect. Burn it. Catherine felt shock rise in her voice. Burn it? Why? Mother Superior looked at the sisters gathered around them. They shifted uncomfortably as if they all knew something but feared to speak. Mother Superior lowered her voice. That book was written in fear. The rituals poisoned the spirits. They became hungry. The book carries their influence. If you read too much they will follow you. They will shape themselves to your memories. Catherine stared at her. So you want me to destroy the only truth we have? Mother Superior voice cracked slightly. We tried to destroy it once. The fire went out on its own. Catherine felt her skin prickle. She looked at the book. It felt warm in her hands again. Too warm. The hall lights flickered. A soft whisper drifted through the room. Several sisters turned in terror. Catherine felt her heart pound. The voice came from the top of the stairs. Catherine. Agnes' voice. Clear. Close. Calling her name. Mother Superior gasped. Close that door. Keep everyone together. Do not let the lights go dark. But Catherine stepped forward. Her feet moved on their own. She walked to the base of the stairs. The whisper came again. Catherine, come to me. She lifted the lantern and looked up. At the top of the stairs stood a figure. Its shape was human. Its dress looked like a sister robe from many years ago. The face was hidden in shadow. Only the outline of a soft smile could be seen. Catherine whispered, Agnes. The figure tilted its head gently. The smile widened. Then the voice changed. It became deep. It became hollow. It crawled into the room like a gust of cold air. Catherine, bring me the book. The lantern flame flickered hard. The room turned colder. Sisters screamed. Mother Superior called for everyone to back away. The figure stepped down one stair. Then another. Then another. Father Merrill rushed to Catherine and pulled her away. Catherine stared at the figure with frozen fear. That was not Agnes. That was something using her voice. The figure reached the bottom of the stairs. The shadows clung to it like thick smoke. The smile twisted into something unnatural. Catherine held the book tightly. The spirits were no longer hiding. Part 9 would reveal why the book chose Catherine and what the spirits truly wanted. If you want Part 9, just say. Create Part 9. Engaging hook. When fear enters a room people run. But when fear takes a shape and begins to walk toward you there is nowhere left to run at all. Part 9. The figure at the bottom of the stairs did not move like a person. Its feet touched the floor without sound. Its shoulders were too still. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle as if the neck had been shaped from clay instead of bone. Catherine felt the cold rise slowly through her chest. Her fingers tightened around the book until her knuckles turned white. Father Merrill pulled her back. Catherine, do not look into its face. They shape themselves from memory. They become what you love to trick you. But Catherine could not look away. The figure wore a sister robe that looked old and torn. The edges of the cloth drifted like smoke. It stepped forward again. A soft whisper filled the hall. Catherine felt the hairs rise on her arms. Catherine, you left me. You let them take me. Catherine shook her head. Her voice trembled. Agnes is gone. You are not her. You are something else. The figure stopped. The smile slowly faded. A hollow darkness grew where the face should have been. The room felt colder. Several sisters cried out and moved behind the pews for protection. The large candles flickered wildly as if reacting to the presence of something unnatural. Mother Superior held up a wooden cross. In the name of the Lord, leave this place. The figure turned its head toward her. The air shifted. The flame of the candles bent sideways as though pulled by an unseen storm. Mother Superior's voice shrank into a whisper. She lowered her hand as fear overtook her. Father Merrill stepped in front of Catherine. The spirits are stronger now. The rituals woke them. That book holds the last piece they need to cross this world without limits. Catherine stared at the book. It felt heavier than before. Almost like a living thing. She wanted to drop it but her hands would not release it. The figure whispered again. You are the door, Catherine. Bring it to me. Catherine felt her breath stumble. Why me? Why did Agnes choose me? Agnes wrote about you in the last pages, Father Merrill said quietly. She said the spirits marked you when you were a child. She said you heard them before anyone else. She believed you could stop them or you could open the passage for good. Catherine felt dizzy. Everything around her seemed to blur. She tried to speak but the figure stepped closer and the room fell into silence. Then it began to change. The robe melted into shadows. The body stretched into a long slender shape. The face vanished completely. 2 pits of darkness glowed where eyes should be. The temperature dropped so fast that frost began forming along the edges of the stained glass windows. A sister screamed. The sound echoed through the hall with sharp terror. The figure turned toward the scream and the shadows around its head twisted as if reacting to the fear itself. Mother Superior grabbed Catherine's arm. Come to the chapel, quickly. Father Merrill pulled her other arm. No, the chapel is where the rituals were done. The spirits are strongest there. We need to go to the West Wing. If we can reach the old archive we may find the last missing record. The figure suddenly snapped its head back toward Catherine. It knew she was moving. The floorboards groaned beneath it as it glided forward with sudden speed. Catherine felt her heart slam against her ribs. Run! Father Merrill pushed her toward the hallway. Catherine ran with quick steps across the cold stone floor. The sisters scattered, crying and praying. The figure followed her silently. The sound of its movement came only from the faint shifting of air behind her. Catherine sprinted into the dark hallway leading to the West Wing. The lantern in her hand shook violently. Shadows danced along the walls. She could hear the figure behind her. Not footsteps, not breathing, just a cold presence closing in. Father Merrill ran beside her. Do not stop. Keep your eyes forward. It cannot enter fully while the lights stay alive. But the lantern flame flickered. The wick bent. Catherine panicked and shielded it with her hand. The flame steadied but she knew it would not last long. They reached a heavy wooden arch that led to the oldest part of the convent. The wood was cracked. Dust floated through the air. None of the sisters came here. This wing had been sealed after the first tragedies decades earlier. Catherine pushed open the door. It screeched loudly. The sound echoed through the halls. She stepped inside. The air felt thick and forgotten. Father Merrill followed her and shut the door behind them. Darkness filled most of the corridor. The lantern barely lit the floor. Catherine whispered, "Will it come in here?" Father Merrill shook his head. "It will try, but the wards from the old sisters remain in these walls. They are weak but they may slow it." Catherine turned to the right. Ahead stood an oak door with iron rings. This was the archive. Catherine pushed it. Dust fell from the top as it opened. Inside the room old shelves lined the walls. They were filled with brittle scrolls and worn ledgers. The smell of dust and old ink hung in the air. Catherine placed the lantern on the desk and began searching through the documents. Father Merrill checked the doorway. Then he froze. "Catherine, it is here." Catherine glanced back. The shadows outside the archive shifted like a slow-moving wave. A cold hand of darkness reached under the door. Catherine felt her breath stop. "Hurry," Merrill urged. "Find the record of Mary Elise." Agnes mentioned it. She said Mary Elise tried to warn the convent. Her writings may hold the way to send the spirits back. Catherine searched through the shelves. Her fingers raced across the old pages. Some records were unreadable, others were missing sections. She kept looking while the shadow under the door grew larger and darker. Father Merrill held the cross tightly. The shadow pressed harder against the threshold. The boards creaked under the pressure. Catherine could hear the faint whisper again. "Catherine, open the door." Catherine closed her eyes and forced herself to stay focused. She pulled out another ledger. Then another. Her hands brushed against a small journal hidden behind a row of old books. The cover was cracked but a name was still visible in faded ink. Mary Elise. Catherine gasped. She opened the journal. The first page described the same rituals Agnes wrote about. The second page showed the same symbols carved in the cellar. The third page described something Catherine did not expect. Mary Elise wrote that the spirits were not simply called by fear. They were born from it. They grew from the pain of the sisters who had suffered in silence through the early years of the convent. Their sorrow created a doorway. Their cries gave the spirits strength. Catherine turned to the final page. The ink was smeared, but she could read the last sentence. The door can be closed only by the marked one. The one the spirits seek. The one the shadows follow. She must decide which world survives. Catherine felt her heart tighten. She realized the truth. She was the one Mary Elise wrote about. The spirits needed her for something. But she also had the power to stop them. The door suddenly shook violently. Father Merrill stumbled back as a heavy blow struck it again and again. Cracks formed in the wood. The shadow outside grew thicker. The whisper grew louder. "Catherine, give me the book." Catherine closed Mary Elise's journal and held both books tightly against her chest. The choice pressed on her heart like a weight she could hardly lift. Father Merrill called to her. "Catherine, what did the journal say?" She looked at him with fear in her eyes. "It says the end is coming. And I am the one who must face it." The door burst open. The figure stood in the doorway. Taller, darker, its shape twisted as if made of smoke and bone. Catherine stepped back as the cold swallowed the room. Behind the figure, the candles in the hall went out one by one. Everything turned silent. Everything turned dark. Only Catherine's breath remained as the spirit began to step inside. Part 10 would bring the final confrontation, the truth behind the spirits and the decision that would decide the fate of the convent forever. If you want Part 10 final part, just say, "Create Part 10. Engaging hook." When the shadows you fear are not outside, but inside you, the choice is no longer to run. It is to fight, or to vanish forever. Part 10 final part. Catherine felt the cold press against her chest like ice. The shadow stepped fully into the archive. It was no longer the shape of a sister. It had become pure darkness, twisting and coiling in the air. Its glowing eyes stared directly at her. Father Merrill raised his cross, but the shadow did not flinch. The air trembled, carrying a voice both terrifying and familiar. "You hold the books. You hold the key. You will choose which world survives." Catherine clutched Mary Elise's journal and the other ledgers. Her hands shook. She had read the instructions. She knew what she had to do. If she hesitated, the spirits would break free completely. The convent, the sisters, everyone would be lost. The shadow whispered again, its voice like scraping metal and wind. "Give them to me. Let the world of pain exist forever. Let the screams continue." Catherine's heart pounded. She thought of all the sisters who had died in silence, the screams no one heard, the shadows that had grown from their fear. This was their chance to end it. This was her chance to end it. She stepped forward. The shadow recoiled slightly, as if surprised by her courage. Father Merrill called out, "Catherine, be careful." But she shook her head. There was no other way. Catherine opened Mary Elise's journal to the final page. The symbols glowed faintly in the dim light. She began to read aloud. The words felt heavy in her mouth. The shadows around the room swirled violently. They hissed, twisted, and tried to reach her hands. The ledgers vibrated in her grip. Catherine raised them high. The symbols on the pages aligned. A light began to form between the books. It was warm, pure, and bright. The shadow shrieked. It lunged forward, trying to pull her into darkness. Catherine held her ground. She focused all her fear, all her pain, all her courage into the words. "You cannot have them," she shouted. "You will not take their souls. You will not take mine." The shadow thrashed violently. The walls of the archive shook. Candles fell over and extinguished. The air burned in her lungs. Father Merrill grabbed her arm to steady her. "Keep going, Catherine, keep going." The symbols on the pages began to burn with a soft golden light. The shadow shrieked louder, a sound that cut through her bones. It twisted and writhed, trying to escape the light. It was powerful, older than the convent itself, but it could not survive the words meant to close the door. Catherine felt the shadow's weight pressing on her. She almost fell. Her voice cracked. The room grew darker, and she could feel the spirits pulling at her from every corner. But then, the golden light burst outward, filling the entire wing. The shadow screamed one final time and shattered. Pieces of darkness dissolved into nothingness. The room grew silent. The air warmed. The chill that had haunted the convent for decades lifted. Candles flickered back to life. Catherine fell to her knees, exhausted, but alive. Father Merrill held her, whispering words of reassurance. Outside, the convent seemed to breathe again. The oppressive weight of sorrow and fear that had lingered for generations lifted. The spirits were gone. The convent was finally free. The sisters emerged from their hiding places, tears streaming down their faces. They embraced one another, trembling but grateful. Catherine held the journals close. They had worked. The horrors that had haunted the convent were finally ended. Father Merrill placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Catherine. You faced them and stopped them. You saved everyone." Catherine looked around. The convent was quiet but alive. The air smelled of incense and dust, but it no longer carried the shadow of fear. The past horrors would never be forgotten, but they would no longer rule this place. She thought of Agnes, of Mary Elise, of the sisters who had suffered and fought silently for decades. They had guided her. They had given her the strength to confront the darkness. She whispered a prayer for them. The convent slowly returned to normal. Life resumed. The sisters rebuilt the parts that had been damaged. Catherine continued her studies, documenting everything she had seen, every ritual, every symbol. She wanted no one to forget the lessons the shadows had taught. The story of the convent, the spirits, and the courage of one girl spread slowly over time. People came to learn the truth, to remember the pain, and to honor the strength it took to finally close the door. Catherine often walked through the halls alone. Sometimes she thought she felt a faint breeze, a whisper of warning. But she knew the darkness could no longer harm anyone. She had faced it, spoken the words, and held the light. Years later, she shared her story with those who would listen. The convent became a place of learning, a sanctuary. Visitors were told of the shadows that had once walked its halls and the courage it took to end them. It became a story of warning and hope, a tale that could inspire bravery in the face of impossible fear. And Catherine never forgot the weight of that final choice. She had been marked by the shadows, but she had chosen light. She had chosen to protect the innocent. That choice had freed more than the convent. It had freed her too. Her story was passed down, whispered in classrooms, written in books, and eventually told on screens across the world. The lesson remained clear. Darkness thrives when people are silent. Courage can end it when one voice rises to confront it. The convent still stands. The rooms are quiet, candles flicker gently, and the air smells faintly of old books and incense. And somewhere in the shadows of memory, Catherine's voice whispers. She reminds anyone who will listen that bravery can shine even in the darkest of times. If you enjoyed this story and want more historic horror tales, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Share this video with friends who love stories that chill and inspire. Every share helps uncover the hidden histories we must never forget.